Well, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for coming out tonight. It's such a beautiful Thursday evening, and it's just lovely that you're here to learn about the Wyoming Constitution. That's excellent. So I really want this session to work for everyone. So if you have questions or ideas, let Thomas know. He can pass the mic over. We can make this as interactive as we want. What I thought might be useful is to start with some historical context, give us a sense of how this document came to be. Then we can talk a little bit about what's actually in the Wyoming Constitution and how we could change it. If anyone ever wanted to make changes to the document, how does that happen? So those will be our themes. But again, if there are topics you want to talk about or ask questions about that we're not talking about, let me know. So a bit of background. Wyoming started as a territory. This was quite common in the 19th century. A lot of the surrounding areas like Colorado, the Dakotas, they were also, beginning as territorial governments. So Wyoming was a territory before it was a state. It entered the Union in 1890 as the 44th state. And every new state that was going to join the U.S., they had to present a state constitution to U.S. Congress. This was the process, this was the method. And sometimes what would happen, the state would present their constitution to Congress, and Congress would either be like, yes, we love it, welcome to America, yay. Or they'd be like, no, that's terrible, you have to revise it. We want you to make these changes, and then bring it back to us. So one of the controversies that occurred during Wyoming's process of trying to enter the Union is that their state's constitution included women's suffrage, which at the time was very controversial. It was not a socially acceptable idea for women to be participating in civic life. So U.S. Congress actually told them initially, no, you can't join the Union because of that provision. We can't have that. But Wyoming came back and said, this is non-negotiable for us. So they were willing to negotiate on a couple of other provisions, but not that one. So a little bit of a fun fact there. Now, right here in Cheyenne, where we are tonight, that's where the state's constitutional convention was held in 1889. I actually pulled up a photo, and I can share this later too for the online folks. This is a photo of the people who were at the Wyoming State Constitutional Convention. And they did something very clever. So at the time, they knew that the idea of women's suffrage, women participating in politics, it was a new thing. So there were no women actually participating in the Constitutional Convention. But they thought for a bit of PR, they'd have any of the wives and sisters and any of the women that were related to the delegates, they'd have them in the photo. So at least it looks like there's some women's representation. And you can see people's kids too, right? So they were trying to do something different with the optics, even if there weren't really women in the room making the decisions. They were represented in a visual way. Now, the Wyoming State Constitutional Convention, or the state constitution, can be found on the Secretary of State's website. You can download a PDF. I always tell my students, if you're stuck in a really long line or you have to take a really long bus ride or train ride or plane ride, it's a great chance to read the Wyoming State Constitution. Maybe it's not like a thriller, right? It's not the most suspenseful document, but there's tons of interesting and important subjects in here. Everything from riparian rights, water rights, to taxation, and we get historical clues about the mining industry, and women's suffrage, the relationship between UW and the state. There's just so many fascinating subjects. So if you ever get a chance, if you're ever in a situation where you have a lot of time, I would say flip through it, see what's in it. Okay, so question for the group, bit of brainstorming. What information do you think we can find in the Wyoming Constitution, if you were guessing?
Probably how our officials are elected.
Yes, Awesome. That's totally in there. Great. Yes. Yeah, there's a lot of information about elections, and they even break it down by the branch of government. And they also talk about the relationship between the local and the state government. So, yeah, you're definitely on the right track. No pressure.
So I imagine it has information about the statewide officers, like the governor, the secretary of state, how the land board works, and the makeup of the two legislative houses.
Yes, yes, that's right. That's all in there. That's excellent. And I'm so glad you bring that up because that's really getting to the structure of the government, right? Like the foundation of how it's designed, what it looks like. That's amazing. Yeah. Great job. Well, if anyone has any guesses as we go, don't hesitate to shout them out or, get Thomas and shout it out with the microphone. There's a lot of fascinating stuff in this document. So, the Wyoming Constitution recognizes individual rights and group rights. Now, like many state constitutions that came after the U.S. Constitution chronologically, it's much longer. So it's 6 times as long as the U.S. Constitution. However, it's not the longest of the state constitutions. Anyone want to guess which state has the longest constitution? You got 50 guesses. Maybe 49. It's not Wyoming. Ooh, that's a good guess. Ooh. Oh, that's a good guess, too.
Virginia.
It's a good guess, but it's not correct. But you're kind of close because it's a large population state. So I feel like in that way, you're warm.
Texas.
Oh, no, but that's also, now you're getting geographically warmer.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Which one? How about this? It starts with an A. Oh, no, but that's close. Which one did you get?
Alabama.
Alabama, yes, great job. Yes. So Alabama has the longest of any state constitution. It's just wild. You could spend days reading that one. Makes the Wyoming state constitution look like a short story. It's just wild. And a lot of the states that came after those original 13 states, their state constitutions were trying to include things that the U.S. Constitution and the early states' constitutions had left out, but that had become more socially normative in like the 1800s, for example. So we see that with some of the articles and sections of this document. Now, like all other state constitutions, legally, the Wyoming State Constitution is considered inferior to the U.S. Constitution because of something called the Supremacy Clause in the U.S. Constitution. This is the idea that the federal government will always be supreme legally to the states. If there's ever a conflict or a question like who's right in this situation, is it the states, is it the federal government? It's kind of like you get to write the rules of the game, right? If it's the U.S. Constitution, they get to say, well, we're always going to be supreme. Okay, another question to consider. If we had to guess, what do we think might make the Wyoming Constitution unique?
Is it the first state constitution written after the beginning of national parks?
Oh, that's a great question. It might be. I don't know, but that's a great question. It probably is. Oh, that's a good one. Yes, because the first one was here.
Mm-hmm.
Oh my gosh, I bet that is. I bet that's right. Oh.
That's probably not what you meant.
No, but it doesn't matter what I meant. That's a great one. That's so clever. Wow. Yeah, we'll fact check it, but I have a feeling that's right. That sounds right. Oh gosh, that's great.
I would assume it's because of the women's right to vote.
Yes, that's the big one, right? Yes. Yeah, Wyoming was the first government to do that in the U.S. And there's a little bit of a battle with New Zealand because around the same time they were doing women's suffrage. So if you're in New Zealand, they're going to tell you they got there first. But it was actually about the same time. Wyoming and New Zealand would have been a couple months apart. So yeah, that's the big unique one. Yeah. Well, if you guys want, if we can keep going, and if you think of any, you can, it's never, the brainstorm's never over. You can always share. Okay, so some of this stuff we know, it's been mentioned. Some of it might be new information. So around this time, this is after the Civil War, the idea of racial equality becomes quite popular in the country, particularly in the new territories, because they're trying to get people to move here, right? They're not, they don't really have the, I guess, how do we say, the same kind of incentives as the South, right? So very different ideas in that sense. In the Wyoming State Constitution, we have this bold declaration, all members of the human race are equal. And on the one hand, you might think, well, this is hopefully obvious today. Hopefully we'd all think that. But again, at the time, it's kind of a big, bold statement. This is the 1800s. Even though this statement makes it into Article 1, Section 2, there are still some things going on during this time that kind of show us that, just because we write something down in a constitution doesn't always make it 100% true. Like, it's not always the reality on the ground. So during the territorial legislature days, almost all of the Wyoming territorial legislators were white and male. There's one guy, William Jefferson Hardin, who's an African-American legislator in Wyoming. He is married to a white woman, and he is very passionate. In addition to being passionate about agriculture bills, he had a lot of those, he's also really passionate about trying to make interracial marriage legal in the Wyoming territory. He keeps introducing these bills. He tries so many times. It doesn't work out for him, sadly, and it's not until 1962 that Wyoming decriminalizes interracial marriage. So this is something that started in the territorial days, then it carried over into the state days. So this is maybe one example where we see that idea of all human beings being treated equally. Maybe it's not happening so much in practice, right? Although, interesting, this is a bit of a side note, but just a fascinating guy historically. His colleagues in the legislature, they were not going to come after him and his wife. Technically, being married was a crime, right? But the kind of excuse they gave, they said, well, you two were married in Kentucky, not in Wyoming. So we're going to just let that slide. We just don't want people getting married here in Wyoming. So they kind of had this bizarre logic to that. Another thing that's happening around this time, a few years before statehood, we see the Rock Springs Massacre occur in Rock Springs, as the name suggests. Sadly, the Rock Springs Chinatown is burned to the ground. We have a lot of violence against minors who are Chinese American, and even there are these horrifying stories. Even people who had been friends and neighbors, white folks who were like teaching English one day, the next day they're in this mob and just hurting people. Really scary time. The federal government was called in. It was a really, really dramatic situation.
However, we also have women's suffrage being secured in the state constitution. That's something that started in the Wyoming territorial legislature, and then it carried over to the state. So this is kind of another theme we see. The Wyoming territorial government had a lot of similarities to the new Wyoming state government. The structure of the legislature is the same, the judicial branch, executive branch, very similar. They kind of did a copy paste. They were like, it's working well enough for the territorial government. We're going to keep a lot of stuff. So one of the things that they kept was women's suffrage. But you know, the story as to how Wyoming got there is also very complicated, very much tinged with racism. So at this time, we have a lot of white suffragists and some white men as well in the territorial legislature who are really upset at the idea that African American men have gotten the right to vote with the 15th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. It's national now. Black men have to be able to vote legally. There's a big backlash to that. And it's not so much a support, like an active support for women's rights. It's more the idea that some of the white guys, like William Bright, he had this quote about, like, you know, my wife is just as good as this guy who's African American. Why can't she vote? So, you know, not the best logic, but this is the prevailing logic in the territorial legislature at the time, and it's William Bright who supports the Wyoming Women's Suffrage Act, which then ends up, the same language ends up in the Wyoming State Constitution. So we see that territorial legislature carrying over to the state legislature, which is fascinating. Okay, so even though there's a lot of complicated stuff happening in Wyoming at the time, there were still a lot of women of color who turned out to vote in that first historic election. This is the 1870 election when Wyoming is still a territory. This is the first election in which women vote in the whole United States. It's a really big deal. And there is a judge in Cheyenne who shows up to watch the election, watch the polls. And a lot of people were doing this. There were journalists here from all over the world, all over the country. It was such a big deal, such a historic event. So some people just came just to, like, see these women voting. What's going to happen? So Justice Kingman, he wrote about this in his journal, his memories of this day. He says, I remember a case in point which at the time caused me much uneasiness. We had at first a large proportion of Southern men and of Northern Copperheads. So Northern Copperheads were people who were in the northern states who supported the Confederacy. And as you notice, this is 1870. Civil War is over. Confederacy's lost, but they're still holding on to it. They're still supporting the Confederacy in 1870. And they would often turn up at the polls in the northern states to try to discourage voters of color from voting. So they're all there at the polls. By that I mean men who advocated secession and came to Wyoming to escape being drafted. Carriages were employed by the candidates to bring ladies to the polls. At the hotel were a number of colored girls employed as servants. After a while, a carriage drove up with 4 of these colored girls in it. They were helped out, and as they went up to the polls, the crowd quietly parted. They voted and returned to the carriage without a word said. Then I breathed freely, knowing that all was safe. So Justice Kingman, like a lot of people, he was a little bit worried because there were these agitators showing up at the polls. He was not sure how it was going to end for the well, he's using the term colored girls. Today we'd say they're women of color because at this time you had to be 21 years of age or older to vote. So you're a woman, you're not a girl. And also we wouldn't use the term colored today. So a little bit of historical stuff going on there. But long story short, he's there, he's observing this, he's not sure how it's going to turn out. But he's so relieved when everything goes well. They can get back into their carriages safely and go home or go back to work. Now, once Wyoming became a state, this tradition of women voting became just part of the routine. And most of the women, in terms of demographics, populations in the territory, at the time who could vote were white women. At this point in time, indigenous women and many Asian American women are legally excluded from suffrage in the 1800s. However, African American women, women who are Latina, and white women would have been able to vote. So this is a photo from the Wyoming State Archives. This is Nancy Phillips. She's one of the black women voters in Cheyenne. This is the first election when Wyoming was a state. So this is a really big deal. She was also quite an organizer, making sure other people could get to the polls too. So today we think about, voter turnouts and organizing to get out the vote. That type of stuff was happening even in the 1800s, just in a slightly different form. Instead of asking, like, whose car are you going in, you would have been like, whose carriage are you going in? A little bit different transportation, but same idea, same gist of it. And then some of you might be familiar with some of the names up on the board. There are a lot of famous women firsts in Wyoming. Because women could vote, they could run for office. That was another big deal at the time. The question was, if we let women run for office, will they be too soft and emotional and hysterical, all those words? And it turns out they weren't. So we have Esther Hobart Morris, who's the first woman in the U.S. to serve in a public office. She's appointed Justice of the Peace in South Pass City. And there's a famous story about how her husband came before her in the courtroom. And I think it was for public intoxication. She was very tough on him. She did not apply the law more leniently for him. And people really respected that. That was like the test, right? Like, can women be good jurists? And she was like, yeah, I'm going to be tough on everyone, even my own husband. Louisa Swain was the first woman to cast a ballot in Laramie, Wyoming. There's some great women's suffrage history over in Laramie if anyone's ever over there. Also, Nellie Taylor Ross, she was the first woman to serve as a governor of a U.S. state. She then went on to become the first female director of the U.S. Mint in D.C. So she had a really storied career as well. A lot of fascinating and important women here in Wyoming. Now, another thing that we find in the Wyoming State Constitution that is unique is the structure of the government. So Wyoming is one of a small number of states that has a part-time legislature rather than a full-time legislature. So in Wyoming, the legislators meet either in a general session or in a budget session, depending on whether or not it's an odd-numbered year or an even-numbered year. And during the budget session, they have to make a budget for the next 2 years. It's not even just for the next year. It's the next 2 years for the whole state. It's a huge job. And because it's a part-time legislature, the legislators, they don't have offices or staff. They don't get a salary or benefits. So it's really more like a community service position. And this structure of this branch of government, it's written right there in the Wyoming Constitution. So if a person was ever like, hey, I don't like this part-time legislature, I want to change it, you'd have to go through the process of changing it through amendments, which we'll talk about. But it's a unique feature for sure. Another thing that's kind of unique here in Wyoming is the way that the right to bear arms is described. Okay. Maybe it's some bees. No, I'm just kidding. So the right to bear arms is more clearly enumerated in the Wyoming State Constitution than in the Second Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. So as you all are probably aware, there have been so many debates over the past, not even just the last century plus, over the meaning of the Second Amendment. What did the framers of the U.S. Constitution intend? Under which conditions and circumstances should people have the right to bear arms? All these debates, legal debates, societal debates. But the Wyoming State Constitution has a much clearer enumeration. People have the right to bear arms in defense of themselves or the state. So that's much more clarity, whether you love that or hate that, however you feel about it. The other thing we can learn from this document is a little bit about the relationship between geography and politics. Now today, the part of Wyoming we're in, down here in the southeastern region, this is one of the more heavily populated parts of the state. And this was also the case at the time of the Wyoming State Constitutional Convention when they were writing this document. So the big concern from all the other regions of the state, the less populated regions, was, will all those people in the southeastern part of the state, are they going to get more representation in the legislature and have a bigger, louder voice than us, like us in the northeast, us in the central part of the state? We're not going to have our voices heard because we don't have the population. So because of that, the Constitutional Convention delegates, they agreed to retain at least one seat in each house in the state legislature, regardless of population size. And this, at the time, was able to assuage some of those fears and concerns from the delegates who were coming from the less populated regions. But interestingly enough, today, that population and geography relationship is pretty similar. So make of that what you will. The Wyoming State Constitution also includes a lot of protections for workers and for people who were in the mining industry. And this was so specific because at the time, this was the burgeoning nascent industry that was fueling this territory and then later the state. So there's a provision in Article 9 to secure the state government's authority to enact safety requirements for mines. Again, you might think, well, that's just obvious. That sounds like something they should be doing. At the time, it was quite a big deal. The right to bring wrongful death lawsuits against private entities, that was one they had to fight hard for as well. If someone, died while they were working and they could, prove that that was related to, a company doing or not doing something properly. So these really reflect that early economic reality of the mining industries. Also, the Wyoming State Constitution has a very clear description of what they want the relationship between religion and government to look like. This is kind of another area where we see a bit more clarity than the U.S. Constitution. That's, we have some clauses about the relationship between church and state in the U.S. Constitution, but the Wyoming State Constitution was a bit more clear and a bit more specific. So, for instance, they just say right out in Article 1, no discrimination on the basis of religion. Another section in Article 1 says, no public funds can be used to support religious organizations. Last but not least, religious instruction is not allowed to occur in public schools in the state. So these discussions and debates that they were having were really about what should that relationship look like between the government and, religious organizations. And in the early days, they really wanted a more distinctive relationship, not too close, not too overlapping. And so that's still with us today. Okay, so a question for us to consider. Anyone know or anyone want to guess, how might we make changes to the Wyoming State Constitution? No pressure. No pressure. I can just tell you. I know the suspense is killing us, right? Okay, so there's kind of two main methods we can go about amending or changing the Wyoming State Constitution. Now, one of the things I want to just say at the outset before we talk about both methods is that both methods involve some mechanism for bringing the amendment to the voters. So it's really, in both situations, the voters in Wyoming who get the final say. If the majority vote yes, we do want this change to the Constitution, then it happens. But if the majority say no, we don't want this change, it doesn't happen. So keep that in the back of your mind, because I think that's really important and unique that we have that step, right? The voters get a proper say in the matter. So step one for the first method, an amendment is proposed in either the Wyoming House or the Wyoming Senate. Now, the way that this happens, it could vary. You could have a constituent, a voter, who brings an idea for an amendment to a member of the House or the Senate. You could have someone in a lobbying group suggest it. You could have the legislator themselves. Maybe they've had this original idea. They're passionate about it. They're going to bring it forward. Now, you need a 2/3 majority of the members in both houses in the state legislature to agree to the amendment. And they have a vote on it. So you do have to have 2/3 majority vote of the seats in both houses. That's typically harder to do than like a simple majority. So the bar is already set higher for this process. Then the legislature publishes the amendment so the public can see it. So let's say just hypothetically, they do get that 2/3 majority vote in both houses. Then it goes out to the world. It's going to be on the legislature's website. Maybe it'll be published in the local papers. They're going to make sure the public has access to this so they can review it and consider it before the next election. And this is the part where the people come in. Step 4, a majority of voters in the next general election approve the amendment. Now, the other option is that they could reject the amendment. That happens all the time too. So you just need a simple majority when the vote goes to the voters. Now, the second method is through a constitutional convention. So far, Wyoming has only had that first constitutional convention in 1889. There haven't been any follow-ups. But it's possible constitutionally to do that. That could be another way to change the Constitution. So in order to call a constitutional convention, you have to have the majority of the voters in Wyoming, or people who are voting, agree that there should be a constitutional convention. So from the outset, we have the voters involved in this process. Then at the convention, that's where the delegates are going to bring their ideas for amendments. You could come out of the convention with 1 new amendment, or 5, or none, right? You never know how it's going to go at a constitutional convention. Let's say there's at least 1 new change proposed. Any of the changes that are proposed at the convention, they have to be approved by the majority of the voters in the next general election. So this process starts with the voters, with the people, and it ends with the people. So that's a slightly different method, but it's the same idea to amend this document. Okay, a bit of brainstorming. What do we think about these methods for changing the Wyoming Constitution? Would you want to keep them the same or revise them? Yes.
What's the structure of a constitutional convention?
Oh,
What's the structure of a constitutional convention?
that is a great question. So the structure includes delegates from all of the state, I believe it's the state house districts, although I will fact check myself on that later. Yeah, so you have representatives from all the geographic regions in the state. And like typically the delegates are not supposed to be like the state legislators or people who are already in office. They might be people who are in local government. They could be people who are active in their county government or county party or something like that, but not like the people in the legislature. So they are supposed to be different.
Okay, you said 2 different things there. You said house districts, and then you said geographical areas. What is it?
Oh, yes, that's very good. Yeah, good question. You know what? We could look it up right now. Should we fact check ourselves? Let's do it.
How long does it take you?
Yeah, let's do it in real time. That's a great question. Oops. Delegates. Oops. Alrighty, so let's see. Ballotopedia is typically considered a pretty reliable source. This source here that they're quoting, they try to update this one fairly frequently, and it's not like a Wikipedia where anyone could contribute. So I would trust the information from this source, just to tell you how I'm thinking about it. So the delegates are elected by the people following a legislative call. They're required to be voters, so this would be 21 years of age or older, U.S. citizen, Wyoming resident for 12 months, qualified electors, residency and citizenship standards. Now this is interesting. I think this gets to your question, the district composition. Delegates are elected from districts that are as nearly equal in population as may be practicable. So that's a bit vague, right? You could go in a few different directions. You could use...
So if I may inject here, how many seats are in the House right now?
We have, oh gosh, is it, oh, they just changed it, 62 now? 62.
And how many in the Senate?
31, so it's 93 total.
So it would require 124 delegates.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Yeah.
And somebody's got to cut geographical areas up into 500,000 divided by 164.
Yeah, I think that's right, yeah.
And how are the delegates supposed to be selected?
Let's see, it looks like, well, they have to be voters, or it looks like they have to have the same qualifications as a voter. Although this part's a little confusing because now you only have to be 18 years of age or older to vote.
Well, that's not the question. How are they? It says delegates are elected by the people following the legislative call. That means you got to have an election for the convention, and you got to have an election for the delegates.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that is what it means. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, so that looks like almost like a two-pronged legislative or two-pronged election process, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think you're right.
And does the Constitution say how you get a convention on the ballot?
You know, that is a great question. Let me see.
At this point, I don't know is an acceptable answer if you want to keep moving.
No. Well, I don't know, but I'd so love to find an answer for you because it's a great question. Oh my gosh, thank you for asking. Sorry, I don't have a clearer answer for you. But you know what? Maybe I could try to find one and send it out online or send it out some way to follow up.
Be ready for the next time you're asked.
Yes, that's a great point. Totally.
Because it seems to me you'd have to get it on the ballot. And then, is it limited to only what reason you want to bring it? Let's say I want a constitutional amendment to prevent outlawing abortion. I want a constitutional convention. Do I have to say that up front when I want a constitutional convention put on the ballot? And is that the only issue the Constitutional Convention can consider?
Now, that's a great question. That one I do know the answer to, for sure. You don't have to state which issue you're calling the convention about. And then once you get there, you have flexibility. You could discuss one issue, you could discuss 5, 10. So.
And of course, somebody's going to have to develop rules of the convention.
Exactly, yes. And the question becomes, will they use the same rules and procedures as the 1889 convention because, it worked and they're already there? Or do they develop new rules? I don't know. I don't know if you're even allowed to do that. That's a great question. Yeah. That's really good.
So it's pretty cumbersome. And do you know when the last amendment was done and what it was about?
Oh, yes, that's a great question. Yes. Oh, I wanted to pull up the... No. But the first option is the more popular. Here, I'll go back to this slide. So this is our more popular option for amending the Wyoming State Constitution. This has happened quite a few times, whereas the Constitutional Convention option, it only happened the once. And sometimes, let me see if I can find in the table of contents. Sorry, guys. Okay. They typically, I thought they would say. Okay, so maybe I'm, yes, all, okay, there we go. All amendments through November 18th, 2024. I believe that's the last time that there was an amendment added, although again, I can fact check and follow up on that. That's a really good question. Yeah.
The last amendment be the very last page of the Constitution?
That's a great question. So they do it by article. Yeah, this is such a fascinating structure. Oh, excellent. Oh, fabulous. Sorry, everyone, it's going so fast. It's going to make everyone seasick. Okay, there we go. Yes. Yes, so they're all in Article 20. Oh, for sure, definitely. If we want, I could scroll down. We could see more of them. Yeah, okay. And if anyone wants me to, like, pause at a particular one that looks interesting, just let me know. Yeah, see this one, maybe I'll take a quick, see, that's interesting. So that's step one, right? Yeah.
That just tells you how to do an amendment. It's not like the United States Constitution, all the amendments are at the end of it.
That is true. Yeah.
Each amendment changes the text.
Yeah.
In the article that it modifies. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and if you guys want, I could show a quick example. It is kind of interesting, like, okay, sorry, I'm gonna go really fast just to a random one. They will do it like this, right? They'll tell you specifically when the change was made, and how it was made, and that type of text is always gonna be in italicized text. So if you're ever kind of curious about the historical, political context surrounding a change to a particular section or article.
Can you search for 2024 in the text there?
Oh, sure. That's a great idea. Yeah, let's do it. If it'll let me. I'm going to try this. Oh, no, that was
They
safe.
keep changing Acrobat. It's hard to remember the menus. Try getting in right click.
Okay, good idea. Control F. Oh, thank you. Thank you so much, Jared. Thank you, Jared. Okay. Hey, teamwork.
Okay.
That was amazing. Thank you. Oh my gosh. I'm obviously not an IT professor, right?
Okay, it was a taxation amendment.
Yeah, yes. And that was just, when we think about it, that's pretty recent, right? That's less than 2 years ago. Yeah, that's a great question. So the other thing we could take a quick look at, I think we're doing pretty well on time here. There are a couple of other options that we have for making changes, either making a new law or making changes to an existing law. And the initiative and referendum processes, they are kind of unique. Like, there are some other states that use these processes, But it's not the case that every state uses them. There's a lot of variation state to state and country to country. So there are some countries that will use initiative and referenda at the national level as well. We don't do that in this country, but the initiative is any attempt by citizens to write new laws through the petition process. So if you are a citizen in the state of Wyoming, you want a particular law to go into effect, but you don't want it to go through the legislature. You kind of want to bypass or kind of scuttle around the legislature. This is an option. Now, the Secretary of State's website, they have lists of all the initiatives and referenda ever proposed. And it's fascinating to go through and look at them because the topics vary significantly, right? People have proposed new laws or changing laws about everything from banning the triple wide trailers to medical marijuana to very, very specific things about like cryptocurrency and the digital currencies. So really any topic is up for grabs here. It's not a very easy process though, and there are political scientists who have said that Wyoming has one of the toughest initiative and referendum processes when compared to the other state governments and even other countries' governments, which is kind of fascinating. But what that means practically is it's difficult for an initiative to actually end up turning into a law. So maybe it gets on the ballot, but the last time that one actually turned into a law was in the early 90s, and it was banning the triple wide trailers on the highways. But because the process, you need a very specific number of signatures, and that formula is based on how many people participated in the last gubernatorial or governor's race. So there's a formula with that. So first you have to actually get petitions, show that there are other Wyomingites who would be in favor of your idea for a law, or in this case, changing a law. And then it has to go on the ballot. And it's a majority voting situation. If the majority of voters support it and accept it, then it could become a law or change a law. Or if it's the other way around, the majority doesn't support it or accept it, it's not going to go anywhere. And that's what typically happens, again, since the early 90s. There hasn't been one that's been successful. But these are processes that are possible. That's the other kind of cool thing about any constitution, whether it's a state constitution, a national constitution, it tells you what's possible for your government, right? Like maybe a certain thing hasn't happened in decades or even centuries, but just to know that it's a possibility if people really want to make a certain change or want to have an impact. I think that information is valuable. But you're all welcome to disagree with me on that, of course. Let's see. So what do you all think are some of the strengths and weaknesses of the initiative process, the referendum process? Any thoughts or questions about that?
Well, you haven't told us what the process is.
Oh gosh, that's a great point, great question. Okay, so first with the initiative and referendum, step one, you present a proposal. It has to be very specific, right? It's not like the Constitutional Convention where you can just say like, we want to do this convention. It has to be a specific policy idea. It has to be written out. You have to have a good proposal. Step two, that proposal turns into a petition. And you have to go around and collect a certain number of signatures from other Wyomingites. And those signatures are supposed to show a bit of support for that idea, or at least support for getting the idea on the ballot, right? So maybe some of the people who signed the petition, they don't end up voting for it, but they wanted to see the idea on the ballot. And again, that the number of signatures you need for the petition, it's very specific, and it's this formula that relies on how many people participated in the most recent governor's election. So that's kind of fascinating. So let's say you meet the threshold for the number of signatures you need on your petition. That's great. Already your initiative's like through some of the hurdles that the other ones didn't get through. That's when it goes on the ballot and goes directly to the voters. In the interim, it's the Secretary of State's office that, checks all the boxes, reviews the paperwork, makes sure you got all the signatures and you did everything you need to do. So there is kind of like someone or some agency that's double checking all the work. And then it goes to the voters. And if the majority of voters say, yes, we want this to be a law, it becomes a law. If the majority of voters say, no, we don't want this to become a law, then it doesn't become a law. And it's very tricky to get them to turn into a law, but it's possible, you know?
I would assume referendum is the same way,
Yes, yes.
except it's trying to repeal something specific.
Exactly, yes. So sometimes the idea is to repeal. Other times people will want to revise a particular law, and they felt like, I think a lot of the times, this is a little bit getting into my own analysis or my own opinion, but I think we see people using referendum especially, but to some extent initiative, when they feel like they try to talk to their state legislators, and maybe they weren't receptive or they weren't listening, and so this makes people feel like they have another option. But I think it tends to be one that, like, people have exhausted all the other efforts, right? It's not like they just kind of came up with this out of nowhere. Typically, most people, most lobbying organizations, most collective action groups, they do try to go through the policy process in the legislature, and if they feel that didn't work for whatever reason, I think sometimes that is where we see referendum, especially, also to some extent the initiative. Gives people feeling that their voice is still significant or could be powerful with enough other people agreeing with them.
I assume referendum, it means an enactment of the state legislature. That can go back to the beginning of the state, obviously.
Maybe, I don't know, would you mind repeating the question? Sorry, I'm not sure I understand.
Effort to revise or overturn an enactment of the state legislature. That doesn't put a time limit on how long ago they enacted it.
That's true, that's true. Yeah, there's no time limit on it, yeah.
It'd be a way to get an old law off of the books.
Definitely, for sure. Yeah, I think that's a great idea. Yeah, you could totally use that for that.
And of course, I don't see anything preventing them from doing it again.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. It's true.
Like this anti-abortion law they passed in a budget session, which is only supposed to be about budget. You could do a referendum to overturn it, and in the very next section, they could pass it again.
That's true, that's true. And you could see that kind of back and forth, almost like a volleyball, or like if we're picturing like a tennis ball. Yeah, that's a great analysis, yeah. Totally. And, you know, to some extent we see that even with the 3 different branches of government, and I think that's like our next topic in May. So something we can talk more about there too is like the way the state government is set up with these 3 branches. The idea is there's separation of powers and balance of powers. They can check and balance each other. But sometimes with politically exciting issues, we do sort of see it almost as more of a volleyball situation, or right, one branch of government is bouncing it to another and then bouncing it back to the other, and it does feel like that back and forth quite a lot, actually. So, yeah, that's something kind of interesting. Whether interesting, bad, or good is kind of up to every individual. Yeah, I don't know. If anyone have any thoughts on the process? Is this something you like, something you dislike? Would you change it in any way if you could?
Well, I would say, again, if you pass something by initiative, number one, you don't have any kind of guarantee how the legislature writes it into the existing laws. And number two, you don't have any guarantee that the next session they'll repeal it.
That is so true. Yeah, it could be very temporary, right? Yeah, that's a good area for improvement. The other thing I'll say, and this is, you know, maybe tangential, but I think it's often like how do I say, it's like the most recognizable version of referendum that we see. So Maybe some of us in the room followed the news around Brexit that was happening a few years ago in the UK. And that process was through referendum, but at the national level. So we don't have that at the national level in this country, but that's something that the UK government does. So sometimes you'll see sort of like high-profile examples of initiative or referendum, but the high-profile examples tend to be when it's a nation doing it rather than a state or a province or something like that. You don't hear as much about those, but every once in a while you'll hear about a national referendum. I think Scotland recently had one about independence. You know, every once in a while you hear about a national, you know, attempt to revise a law. Okay, so turning our attention to what's happening next, this is such an exciting year because it's an election year. I would say it's great to follow government and politics every year, every day, right? But especially in an election year, it's so important. We are currently in a midterm election year. So every 4 years, there's the general election cycle with the president and the vice presidential races. That's when we get the highest possible voter turnout rates in the state of Wyoming, but also in the nation. That's like the best chance that we get, right? But the midterm elections are so important too. Fewer people turn out, again, both at the state and federal level, but they're so crucial because there are so many different offices up for election. Local, state, national, like with members of Congress, like so many important races on the ballot. At the local level, they'll consider things like the sixth penny, just a myriad of options. Now, some information that's Wyoming specific. If you would like to participate in one of the party primaries in Wyoming, that is going to occur on August 18th. Now, the thing with the primaries is that you have to be registered with the party that has the primary before the election even happens. So this year, the deadline to either change your affiliation, or if you were independent, you want to choose an affiliation, that would be May 13th. So if you want to participate in the Democratic primary or the Republican primary, that's your deadline to fill out that paperwork. The general election will be held November 3rd, and something that's kind of cool, I think this is cool. If you've never registered to vote in Wyoming, you can register to vote even up to and on the day of the election. In both cases, the primary and the general. But for people who are already registered, who already have that record, again, if you want to participate in a primary, if you want to change your party or become part of a party, you have to do that by May 13th. The other thing to be aware of, Wyoming is what's called a voter ID state. So what this means is when you register to vote, you have to bring some form of photo ID to register with you. Not all states do this, but Wyoming is one of the ones that does. There's a list on the Secretary of State's website, and we also have a list on our handout of all of the acceptable forms of ID. So, you know, it could be a student ID from a community college. It could be a driver's license or a Wyoming ID, a tribal ID or a passport. There are a lot of options, but those you have to bring when you initially register. The other thing I would just say, you know, briefly about voting, Wyoming has an absentee voting process. So if you are living, or, you know, if you're outside of Wyoming but you're voting in Wyoming, you can use the absentee process for that situation. But even if you're here in Wyoming, you know, living in Cheyenne, living in wherever, Laramie, Pine Bluffs, anywhere, if you want to vote by mail, you can use the absentee ballot process to do that. The other thing I would say, and this one's a little bit more obscure, but if you want to get another political party on the ballot, the deadline to do that is May 3rd. So if you're thinking, hey, I have a really cool idea for a political party, I'm going to make my own political party, you have to get 5,200 signatures on a petition, so you have to show there are other people who would support your party. You have to fill out some paperwork with the Secretary of State on their website. And then, you know what, your party gets to become part of the process. So if anyone in the room ever feels like, hey, I got a cool idea for a political party, it's not out of the realm of possibility. There's a process, rigorous process you have to go through, but it's still feasible. The other thing I have, another kind of repeat side from last time, these are just some of my suggestions for reliable sources of information, particularly about Wyoming politics. I like all of these because they're nonprofit and nonpartisan. So the nonprofit part is that they're not trying to make a profit off of reporting the news. I would say the most they could be accused of is having a bit of a dry tone, right? Sometimes I've had students say like, oh, it's a little bit boring, right? But they're not going to try to work you up in an emotional way. They're just going to tell you the facts. This is what we know at this point in time. Then it's also really useful, I think, to watch the state of the state and the state of the judiciary. This gives us a great sense of what the people who are leading the executive and judicial branches of government, how they're thinking about their role in government, how they're thinking about the roles of their branches. We hear a lot about the legislature, I think, and to some extent the governor's office, but we don't always hear about the state of the judiciary. So that's a great source of information to learn more about that branch. Also, we're currently in what's called the interim session. So state legislators are going to be meeting throughout the spring, the summer, the fall, and they're going to figure out which policy decisions they should consider when the next legislative session begins. And that's a process anyone and everyone can participate in. If there's an issue or a problem or a challenge that you see, you can bring it to one of the committees and share your experience, share your story, say like, hey, this is what I think the government should or shouldn't do about this. It's also a chance for people to have input on specific bills. So during the interim session, the legislators will develop policies that they will want to introduce in the next session. If there are policies that you think are awesome, go tell them you love them. If there are policies that you're like, no, that's terrible, that's a bad idea, go tell them it's a bad idea. The whole point is like, it's your voice and they need that citizen input. It's crucial. So I would say, whatever your perspective and like whatever your passions, right? Some people might be passionate about like education or housing or agriculture, whatever. Like definitely keep an eye out for stuff you're interested in, because I promise you there will be at least one committee that will cover that issue. Sometimes the policy issues go across committees. So that's a great way to participate in the process too. Yeah, how are we feeling? Any thoughts, questions, concerns?
I do just want to note that this program, we are recording it, and I am posting it to the Laramie County Library's YouTube channel along with our Facebook account. So keep an eye out tomorrow morning. I will post a video with this whole recording. I'll put some closed captions over it, and then I will also share the link to the presentation. So you guys have all the links that she shared and all the information and stuff. So I'll start following up these sessions with some good recap videos. And if you have friends or people you may know who weren't able to make it, you can just have them check out our Facebook or our YouTube and they can watch it there.
That's awesome, thank you.
Lily, do you want to just give them a little preview of what's coming up in the next two sessions?
Sure, that's a great idea. So sure.
We have a patron asking a question online. Marla said mail-in ballots have to be sent in for post marking earlier this year. Yes? Question mark.
well, it never hurts. It never hurts to get them in earlier. But they are supposed to take them if they were postmarked up until or on the day.
Up until or on November 3rd, correct?
Yeah.
Perfect. I hope you got that, Marla.
Can you back up one slide?
Oh, yes, for sure.
This thing about registering on election day, you still have to bring to the poll something like a piece of mail that shows your address and proof of citizenship.
Yes, you do have to bring an ID, a voter ID. So, you know what I can even do?
Ma'am, that's not the same thing.
Oh, okay. All right.
You're not going to have a voter ID if you're not registered.
Okay.
Or did you say photo ID?
I said a photo ID.
Oh,
so
I'm sorry.
I was just going to pull up like the Secretary of State's website. They have a very clear
Go ahead.
list. I think that's like, this could be a great answer to your question, I think. Of state voter ID. So they'll share this list with us of all the options. And I'm sorry, I should have had this on a slide. That would have been way better, way more useful. But we can find it here. This is the Wyoming Secretary of State's website, so they try to keep this up to date. Under this section, acceptable identification for registering to vote. So here they're going to show you all the options. This is what you have to bring with you when you register. So that's including, if you go and register on Election Day, if you're registering before Election Day, whenever you're registering, you do have to have these options on top, or you have to have 2 of these options down here. So, yeah, these are the ones that they accept.
Okay, that's proof of identity.
Yeah.
It's not proof of a citizenship or where you live. Back up one.
Okay.
Back up one menu.
You want to go here?
No. One more down.
Yes, we have another. Yeah.
There you go, proof of United States citizenship.
That's great. So we had a comment from the audience, really helpful context and information. If you go to register to vote and you don't have the piece with your address, you can sign a piece of paper that says you do live in Wyoming, you are a resident, and they will accept that. That's great to know. Thank you.
But my point in all of this, if you're going to register at the poll, you still need those 3 things. You need a photo ID, you need proof of citizenship, and something that shows your address. The address is important because they need to know what precinct to put you in.
Definitely, yeah. And I mean, if you'd like,
It's not just Wyoming residency, it's your address.
Yeah, if you want, we could look at this tab too. I think these are the documents they're saying helps with the proof of Wyoming residency. So, yeah, I think that's a great distinction to make.
But if you walk up to the polls and say, I want to register at the poll, and you don't have that documentation, you're not going to be able to register.
That is so true. Yeah, you have to have it.
Go ahead.
She said, on kind of the same topic, she says, I thought only birth certificates and passports would be accepted as proof of citizenship now.
Oh, that's a great question, Marla. Thank you. I'm going to go up here. Currently, as of today, the Wyoming Secretary of State will accept all of these options as proof of U.S. citizenship. So I'll read them out really quickly. A valid Wyoming driver's license or a valid Wyoming ID card, provided that the card does not contain any indication that you're not a U.S. citizen. A valid tribal ID card, a valid driver's license or ID card by another state, but with that real ID, provided that it doesn't contain any indication you're not a U.S. citizen, a valid U.S. passport, a certificate of U.S. citizenship, a certificate of naturalization, a U.S. military draft record or selective service registration acknowledgement card, a consular report of birth abroad issued by the U.S. Department of State, or an original and certified copy of a birth certificate in the U.S. bearing an official seal. So I think, yeah, you were definitely on the right track, Marla. It looks like there's a couple other options in addition to the ones you mentioned, but yeah, those are definitely viable options.
At the clerk's office or at the polls, if you have a driver's license, that's all you need.
Yes, as long as it has your Wyoming address on it.
Which mine does.
Great, perfect.
Don't they all?
Yes, well,
Oh, okay. Right, in the precinct, then you need it for that, yeah, something.
yeah, just to show if you've moved. Although it does sound like from our awesome audience member, maybe there would be another option, signing another paper. So maybe there's some flexibility there.
I'm just confused. Your comment that you would need 3 articles to register.
If they accept the address on your driver's license is where you live, that would account for where you live.
Yes. So then you'd only need that.
If that's correct,
Yeah.
I'm going to ask you.
Okay.
That's the precinct they put you in.
Yeah, that's true.
If you walk up to Laramie County polling place, say I want to register to vote, and your address is Casper, it's going to say, where do you live in Cheyenne?
Yeah, for sure.
Just a clarification on the driver's license and citizenship. I assume everybody knows what real ID is. So you get that little star on your driver's license. Well, one of the problems is in order to get that star on your driver's license, a green card was acceptable to prove you're legally in the United States. Now in Wyoming, if that's the case, since I believe 2005, they have to put on the driver's license that you're not a citizen.
Okay.
So that's how the driver's license shows that your citizenship is assumed if you've got a real ID.
Okay.
And as a point of trivia here, in the last general election, voter turnout in Laramie County was 106%. Now, for all you election deniers thinking something's wrong, it was 106% because of same-day registration. There was at least 6% of the number of already registered voters that registered on election day. So it's obviously not that hard.
Okay, oh yeah, we'll do a quick preview. So we'll have another session about a month from now at the end of May. At that session, we're going to discuss the 3 branches of Wyoming state government. So we'll dig into a little bit of how they're structured, their powers, their responsibilities, you know, kind of what they can and can't do. Then in August, I guess about a week or 10 days before the primaries, we'll have another session in which we sort of try to prepare for the primaries, take a look at what's on the ballot in Laramie County specifically, but there'll be some state and national elections as well. So that's what's coming up next. Oh, yes, we do.
Sorry, bear with me here. 2 shakes of a lamb's tail. Sorry, guys. Bear with me here. I know, I think I know the date, but I don't want to tell you guys all the wrong day, so give me just a second. Okay, that last session is going to be on August 6th. Oh, the next one is May 28th.
Thank you.
May 28th and August 6th.
2 more. All right. Well, everybody, will you please give Lily another round of applause? She is doing an amazing job. We want to continue to offer things like this going forward. So any feedback you guys can give to the library directly, letting them know that these are valuable resources, things that you want to see more of, that's always going to be helpful as well, okay? And obviously letting people know about it. I think we're at the very beginning of this, and this is something I hope we can build on. So thank you so much for spending time with us tonight.
Thank you. Thanks for coming out.